All right, well, let's go ahead and get started so we can end on time today. Everyone, my name is Marie Gerardo. I work with UTeach Computer Science, and Jason Slabowski is on the call with us today. Thank you all for joining us for our webinar on learning how to earn micro-credentials. There's a bit.ly here and a QR code if you want to follow along with us. Our agenda for today, we're going to start out with an overview of what are micro-credentials. And we're going to dive a little bit into the 8 micro-credentials developed by UTeach Computer Science and how educators can win $50 by completing these micro-credentials. And we'll open up to some questions at the end. Also, feel free to ask questions in the chat. So very briefly, what is UTeach Computer Science and the UTeach Institute? It's a nationally replicated pre-service teacher preparation program for undergraduate STEM majors, has now been replicated by universities all over the country. And we have developed at UTeach CS inclusive, project-based, College Board endorsed curriculum for both AP Computer Science principles and AP Computer Science A, along with these free micro-credentials that we'll talk about today. If you are interested in the APCS stuff, please visit our website. We have been working with Digital Promise to offer these micro-credentials on their platform. So they have a whole ecosystem of over 450 micro-credentials from 50 different organizations, and we are one of those partners. Now, what are micro-credentials? So micro-credentials are basically competency-based professional learning instead of hours-based professional learning. So all of those, from a variety of skills that you want to pick, you're going to demonstrate your competence in that specific skill or maybe a set of skills. All of the micro-credentials on Digital Promise's website are research-backed. So they've been vetted, they've been grounded in the research about how that particular skill supports student learning. And teachers can select from over 450 different micro-credentials, so you can kind of personalize where your personal learning goals are, or maybe your district learning goals to make it more customized for you in particular. All these micro-credentials are on demand, so you can start them whenever you want and keep going whenever you want, and they're shareable. So they're open. Digital Promise uses open badges, which are verified and can be shared and controlled by that earner of badge. So I'm going to talk a little bit about current and future directions for micro-credentials. This is very district specific and state specific. So there's a couple links over there on the left to look up what's happening in particular in your area. Some districts and states are already or are starting to use micro-credentials as part of their certification or recertification. Some districts and states are using micro-credentials in lieu or to supplement any professional learning requirements. And other districts and are starting to think of micro-credentials as possibilities for salary incentives, for employment decisions, and districts have actually been developing their own micro-credentials with topics that are timely for their particular teachers. So for each micro-credential that you'll see on the Digital Promise platform, it starts off with an overview, a key method, and then it'll delve into a little bit more of the details, the components, best practices about that skill, and then supporting research, and then a bunch of different additional resources. And then that's the kind of point where you're supposed to go and implement the skill in your classroom. And then at the very bottom of the page, there's a place to submit evidence on that particular skill. Now, in just a few minutes, we're going to delve into that number 1 and number 6, a little bit of the overview for our particular 8 micro-credentials, and a little bit about what you would need to submit for our particular 8 micro-credentials. How do you earn a micro-credential? So you just pick a skill, collect evidence to demonstrate your competence in that skill, submit that evidence, and then you will either earn that micro-credential, or maybe you'll get something that says, hey, we need you to submit a little bit more evidence before you can earn that micro-credential, and then you can download and share that badge. Here are the 8 micro-credentials developed by our program. So as you'll see, where you teach computer science, most of ours are focused on CS related instructional strategies. There's 3 of these that are that can be used by most K-12 educators. So the active and equitable recruitment strategies is a great one for counselors, anybody who's helping recruit students into an engineering elective or computer science elective, robotics, anything like that. So counselors, maybe even district administrators that are helping with that process. Unplugged computational thinking is another great one that can be embedded in all types of classrooms, not necessarily CS classrooms only. And then peer instruction is another one that can be used in a lot of different classrooms. And then we have a bunch of other great ones that are really excellent for CS related classrooms as well. So Jason, do you want to talk a little bit more about these 8 particular micro-credentials?
Sure thing, and welcome everybody. I'm going to talk about the micro-credentials, and I'm also the assessor for UTeach, so I'm the one who reviews all of these. And I just want to let you know that the evidence that you're submitting, it's not like it's going to be a lot of additional work. You'll see as we go through this, a lot of the evidence you need to submit are recordings of your students working in the classroom. If you did hybrid and you did remote instruction and you recorded some of those remote sessions, that is also allowed to be submitted. But I'm also going to explain using UTeach's curriculum, especially for CSP, some of the activities you could have done already and submitted them. So let's start off with active and equitable recruitment. When you're recruiting for your CS class, you want to keep in mind that CS usually has a lot of barriers to the classroom. It's usually dominated by white and Asian males. Underrepresented minorities are not represented, obviously, in CS classes, and they tend to be low with female enrollment as well. So when you're looking to recruit for your CS class, you really want to put a lot of thought and effort into it, and you want to come up with a plan, okay? And you want that plan to be as equitable as possible, because you don't just want a class like AP-CSP to just be for the higher level learners in your school. You want to make these classes accessible to all the students in your school. So that's what we're talking about with active and equitable recruitment, okay? Active recruitment is essential to increasing access, structured approach to planning and implementing equitable recruitment practices. If we can skip to the next slide. When people are submitting evidence to me for this micro-credential, they're describing your school in context and the recruitment messaging plan. They submit one artifact of your recruitment plan. So usually the artifact is just a document, and then a written reflection. Since I am the assessor, I'll let you know the more in-depth reflection, the better chance you have of your micro-credential being approved. So just when you're writing a reflection, I always like for people to not only reflect on the student point of view, but also the teacher point of view. So that is our active and equitable recruitment one. And that one you can do in a lot of different classes, not only CS. All right, next one, live coding. All right, live coding, if you're not familiar with it, involves writing a computer program in real time in front of the class. Live coding helps make expert thought process visible to novices. Now, when I do live coding exercises in our materials, it can be with either Scratch or it can be with Python or Java. One of the things I would love to do is our rock, paper, scissors project in Scratch. I would do that as a live coding assignment in front of the whole class. Once again, I've had teachers submit live coding done remotely, where they're on a Zoom meeting and they're doing a live coding assignment and their students are raising their hands and answering questions. So just keep that in mind, because you might have already done activities like this in the past. So yeah, live coding can be done with Python in hours. I gave you the Scratch example. It can also be done in our Unit 4 for CSP when you're doing Python, and obviously in our CSA course. Live coding exercises are also great because it allows everyone to ask questions in real time. And when you're programming, that's really important. All right. As far as what you need to submit. All right. Now, you're going to see a lot of times we ask you to submit a video. Now, when you submit a video, the easiest way of doing that is just take a video, upload it to YouTube, share the link with me. If you're going to share a video that's saved in your Google Drive, make sure that you share the video with me. A lot of times when I don't approve somebody's micro-credential, it's because I just couldn't see their evidence. All right, so just something to keep in mind. You're going to submit a video. Once again, it could be a remote learning experience or in an actual classroom in school. You're going to describe how you prepared to implement the live coding. Okay, preparation is really important. It shows us before we assess the micro-credential that you've made a plan, and that's important. You're also, once again, going to have that written reflection at the end about what you learned from implementing live coding. These micro-credentials are designed to make you a better teacher. So that's what we want you to reflect on at the end of the activities. Okay, pair programming. Love pair programming, right? We have the driver and the navigator. So pair programming, we use a lot in our CSP course, especially in Scratch in Unit 2 and in Unit 3. Students are getting familiar with coding for the first time, block-based coding. So literally pair programming is you got that driver there in front of the computer, controlling the keyboard and the mouse, and then we got the navigator. They're sitting next to them and they're talking to them and they're providing guidance. Now, I know it sounds really ridiculous, but it's important for students to keep switching the role of driver and navigator when you're doing pair programming, because each student needs to experience what it's like to actually type in the code or input the code, and what it's like to actually debug it, to be that extra set of eyes, the navigator, to make sure everything is going right. We love pair programming. Students collaborate. They get very confident because they're not doing it on their own. Now, what do you need to submit? Once again, strategies used to pair students together. Now, this could be, heterogeneous grouping strategy, where you link a high-level learner with a low-level learner, and then that way you have them working together. It could be more where you let the students pick their partners, but just remember, you want to come up with a plan, and there has to be a reason for that plan, all right? If you're going to let the students pick their partners, it might just be because you want students to enjoy this activity more by having a partner that they like working with. Where later on in a unit, if it's more advanced, you might want to mix them up and put students who don't normally work together. We need a video of the students working together as the navigator and the driver. Once again, you could submit a remote lesson as well. Submit a student written reflections on what they learned from this activity, and then provide a written reflection on what you learned by implementing this activity. So that's important. We want to get the student point of view, like, hey, what'd you think of pair programming? What'd you think of being the driver, the navigator? And then you as the teacher, what did you think of this strategy? Did it help your students learn things together? Did you have less questions at the end? So another micro-credential, it's not easy for me to say, that I really like to use in the classroom. All right, peer instruction. Now, I use peer instruction all the time when I'm reviewing for exams. So if you're using our materials, CSP, we have our review and our unit exams. So if we're doing unit reviews, it's a lot of multiple choice questions. You would assign the multiple choice first to the students individually. Then they get into small groups. They talk about the question again, and then we discuss the answers as a whole group. Kind of like a jigsaw, not really like a jigsaw, but it does involve that group element. Students are obviously more engaged when they're talking in groups, but you want to make sure that they're actually on task, all right? I always say, it doesn't pay to do group work if one person is doing all the work and everyone else is just agreeing. So this is a good way to get students to master content as well, because they have 3 helpers in a group of 4. Now, what do we want you to submit to us? You're going to describe how you introduced and structured the peer instruction activity. Submit the peer instruction question template, describing the design of your peer instruction, and a video showing the implementation. Remember, again, those videos, make sure you share them with me if they're in your Google Drive, and then another written reflection on what you learned from implementing peer instruction in your classroom. All right, Next micro-credential. Now, I love unplugged computational thinking activities. In CSP, this would be our Unit 1 activities. Our password generator project is unplugged. Peanut butter and jelly algorithm is unplugged. So we have a lot of unplugged activities, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You don't need a computer. Students just jump right in and they start learning about algorithmic thinking and conceptual learning. All right, you can use this in any subject area. We like to use it in CS. So let's say you did one of our activities. What do you need to submit to us in order to get the micro-credential? So I'll use that like password generator project as a good example. You're going to provide a short description on the unplugged activity, implement it in your classroom, computational thinking practices. Now you're going to submit a video of students engaged in the activity. So if you did password generator, your students are there, they're writing their algorithms, they're using cipher code, they're using Visioneer code, Visioneer ciphers to write their code. Now, this is all done on paper. We want a video of your students writing this down on paper. Then you're going to provide a written reflection on what you learned by doing an unplugged computational thinking activity. Most teachers agree that these are great beginning spots to teach your students just how to start thinking algorithmically, which is important because eventually you want them to be able to do things like code tracing. Now, code tracing is kind of like going to be a big deal when they're doing coding because they go line by line, tracking the changes that are made as the program executes. Now, in our curriculum for CSP, we have activities, not surprisingly, called code tracers, code makers, and code debuggers. And those activities are specifically like this. Students have to read code line by line and then write to someone who doesn't have an extensive CS background what's going on. So they can then duplicate the code or write it themselves. So code tracing activities is definitely something you should be using in your classroom. Now, in order to show us that we can give you that micro-credential, you got to describe the context of your code tracing activity. Like I said, in our CSP course, we have 20 different activities in a folder waiting for you to use. Submit a video showing the implementation of the code tracing with your students and upload a picture showing one of your students' work examples, all right? When you're doing code tracing, it's really important for students to literally sit there and like line by line, just go through it. Now, if you actually want to have a student there with a pencil doing it, that's fine. And then obviously we want a written reflection from you on what you learned from this activity. All right, next micro-credential, planning before programming. Now, this one might sound like, well, what do they mean, planning before programming? That could be anything. Well, more specifically, we're talking about using flowcharts, mapping out algorithms like pseudocode. Pseudocode is such a big part of the AP CSP exam. Remember, pseudocode is a made-up language because they can't just use either Scratch or another block language. It would give those students who knew that language an advantage. So AP comes up with a fake language called pseudocode, and then students have to basically map out algorithms or use this pseudocode. Now, we have in our materials a lot of things about flowcharts. We have the friendship algorithm lesson from the Big Bang Theory. But more importantly, we want those students to get familiar with using storyboards to map out programming and those pseudocodes. So now, what are you going to submit to us? A short description of that pre-coding activity you choose to implement in your classroom. You're going to do the video showing students doing the pre-coding activity. So if you wanted to assign your students some of those pseudocode activities, you would record the students engaged with looking at the code, mapping it out. What is it going to mean? And then once again, a written reflection from you and your students on what you guys have learned by doing this activity. All right, so next one is the rubber duck debugging. And I wish I can say and take credit for coming up with this, but this is actually a story from a book called The Pragmatic Programmer, and it's used to debug code. So what it means is that you're basically going to get a little rubber ducky and you basically talk to the rubber duck while you're going line by line in your code to debug it, okay? Saying what each line is supposed to do. Now, this is fun for you to do. It's one of these like, CS traditions, kind of like Hello World. This is a fun thing to do. So a lot of teachers like to get a bunch of rubber ducks, give one to each group or each student, and then have the student talk to the rubber ducky. All right, now, if you did this in your class, what would you have to submit to us? Well, we want you to describe how you introduce rubber duck debugging to your students, how you encourage students to make a personal connection. We want you to submit a video showing the implementation. So yes, I have teachers basically record their students talking to the rubber duck while they're debugging their programs. And then provide a written reflection on what you learned from implementing rubber duck debugging with your students. All right, so with that, I believe that was all 8, and I will kick it back to Marie.
That was all 8. And I know we went through all of those really quickly. And in that beginning slide, you saw the GIF. There is so much more information in each of those micro-credentials. I really invite all of you, I mean, it talks through best practices and the research behind why each of those skills can be valuable in the CS classroom or in any classroom. So I invite you all to look through all of that in more detail. And for a limited time, we're really trying to encourage educators. I know micro-credentials are still kind of new, so we're trying to encourage people to earn these micro-credentials. And we have some $50 Amazon gift cards that we can give away, and quite a few of them too. So all you really need to do is earn a micro-credential from, and if you earn one of our 8 as soon as possible, then we're just going to give away Amazon gift cards. There's up to 100 gift cards. There's a few very limited eligibility requirements. You need to be a K-12 educator. You can be a teacher or counselor or an administrator. You need to be a U.S. resident. You can't have previously won a gift card from us. It's just one per teacher. And you have to opt into the digital promise data sharing. It's the automatic. We just need your contact information to let you know you won. If you don't do anything, you're automatically opted in. So visit our website for more eligibility requirements. Visit that website to get started, to learn more, to pick one of our 8 and win a gift card, pick one of the 450 and start your micro-credential journey. We are trying to get teachers to start our micro-credentials soon. A lot of those, as you can see, you need to be doing something with your students in the classroom in order to earn them. And so those 100 gift cards are going away pretty quickly as the end of the year kind of wraps up.